Welcome again to my presentation reviewing the state of Tamil Nadu's finances ahead of the budget presentation for the year 2017-18. You may recall that in the previous three sections I covered an introduction to budget analysis, introduction to how to measure responsibility in financial management, and a detailed analysis of performance in terms of revenue management or revenue account management over the last 13 or so years. In this section, let me talk a little about fiscal account management. Again, when you look at fiscal account management, it's a stark contrast between what the DMK did between 2006-11 and what the ADMK did between 11 and 16. If you look at for every dollar or rupee of capital investment made by the ADMK government when it handed over in 2005-06, 5 years later the DMK had made that 3 rupees and 31 paisa. Massive growth in investment, which is a precursor to getting good growth. Better roads, more bridges, more hospitals, more schools, better sewage systems, better factories. On the other hand, the ADMK government, when it took over from the DMK government in 2011, in 5 years was only able to grow capital investments less than 50%. That is a huge difference between 331 for every 1 rupee compared to 1 rupee 50 paisa for every 1 rupee. Now what's really scary about this is that we are going to pay the consequences of this lack of investment for many years in the future. And to put the scale of this lack of investment in context, if the ADMK government had grown 5 years capital investment at the same pace as the DMK government had grown, it would have invested last year 46,000 plus crores in capital investment. In fact, it invested only about 20,000 crores, so less than half of what it should have, or a gap of about 25,500 crores. The height of irresponsibility is not just investing less. The height of irresponsibility is investing less and borrowing more. And here you have a situation where in the course of 5 years, the DMK government only raised the total debt 78%, while simultaneously raising capital investment 331 or 231 plus 100, because it was able to finance a lot of investment from revenue surpluses. The ADMK, on the other hand, because it was already using a lot of the fiscal deficit to finance revenue deficits, raised the debt faster despite investing less as a percentage in capital investments. So you can see here, in the 5 years, the ADMK government raised the debt by over 100%. For every rupee of debt they inherited in 2011, they finished 2016 at 114% higher. In rupee terms, that equals about 37,000 crores in extra debt. Now, step back for a second if you don't mind and look at what the revenue records look like. Here is a graph that shows every bar that year's revenue surplus or deficit, and the line the cumulative revenue surplus or deficit over the last 13 years ever since the implementation of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And here you can see that the first 11 or so years, the system was fairly in control, never had a deficit greater than 5,000 crores accumulated, and at one point had as high as 8,300 crore revenue surplus. In the last 3 years, that has just plummeted and completely gone out of control, and you're seeing levels that you've never seen before. In other words, if you look at this number, at the end of last year, the accumulated value of the last 13 years was 15,000 crores. This year alone, we're going to more than double that. So, a different way of looking at this is, if you borrow as a government, what are you using the borrowing for? Here on the left, you see the DMK government's 5 years. For every rupee it borrowed in fiscal deficit, it invested 167 in capital this year, 223 this year, 117 this year, and then the difficult years less. For an average over 5 years, every rupee it borrowed, it invested 1 rupee 32 paisa. ADMK government, on the other hand, because it was borrowing mostly to finance revenue deficits in terms of rupee terms, because revenue spending is much greater than capital spending, it ended up doing very little capital investment. for an average of only 90% of the fiscal deficit was invested in capital and 10% of it was for revenue deficits. Now some people will say, well, because of inflation, because of the value of the rupee dropping, and therefore the numbers looking bigger, this is not a fair comparison. I have done a scaling that removes all such biases from the system. And that is to say, let's look at capital investment, revenue deficits or surpluses, and fiscal deficits, all as a percentage of the size of the economy or the GSDP. And here you see the clear difference. On average, the DMK invested 2.5% of GSDP into capital, financed 0.32 of that from revenue surpluses, and therefore ran a fiscal deficit of 2.18%. The 5-year ADMK regime invested slightly less in capital, but ran a revenue deficit instead of a surplus, and therefore had to borrow almost 0.5% more a year of its GSDP, which is a large number, in fiscal deficit. This year was already projected to be the worst year on record at 1.8%, a meager 1.8% of GSDP in capex, a huge 1.16% in fiscal deficit, leading to a total of, or in revenue deficit, leading to a total fiscal deficit of 2.96%, conveniently under the 3% barrier that the FRA Act requires. In fact, the half-year figures suggest we will do much, much worse than that. 1% capex or capital investment, 2.5%, never before heard of in the history of Tamil Nadu, revenue deficit, leading to a total of 3.5% of GSDP fiscal deficit. Don't let the small variations in numbers fool you. 1% of GSDP is a huge number. The GSDP of Tamil Nadu this year is projected to be about 13,65,000 crores, which means 1% is 13,650 crores, or the 2% or 1.5% difference here is roughly 20,000 crores. That is a lot of money. That is roughly twice the entire budget for the municipal administration, urban administration, and water development department of the government of Tamil Nadu. So let me conclude this section by saying the height of irresponsibility is not low growth investment, low investments that will result in low growth. It is low growth while at the same time increasing debt to such high levels that you are constraining future payments and future programs of the government by taking a larger and larger share of its revenue to pay interest on this massive rise in debt. Thank you.